Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. Please go ahead and take the vegetarian sandwich on the right, regular on the left. There's salad and chips, and the drinks are by the door where you entered. Thank you all for coming. My name is Diana Conway, and I'm excited to be the president of the Women's Democratic Club. So welcome to this WDC Luncheon on the critical issue of educating our children. I especially want to thank those of you who are members and those of you who are not to ask you to please consider joining the club. Your dues are the backbone of our ability to support activists and pay for our modest costs like room rentals, our printed directory, which you get when you join, our website, and the all-important appetizers at our happy hours. We are a terrific fellowship of activists and opinionated women and men, and we need your help for our working committees. There is something for every interest and every skill set. From putting together these luncheons to running programs like desegregating MCPS, to our advocacy committee as we gear up for the 90-day sprint in Annapolis, to coordinating canvassers and voter registration by mail, outreach to communities that are underrepresented in our WDC membership, and of course, to work on the 2020 election. I'd like to first ask everyone to join me in recognizing our board members. If you would all please stand. Any board members? And I also want to thank our elected officials for joining us today. We have, on behalf of Senator Cardin, Marley Pasternak. Marley's over here. On behalf of Representative Raskin, Krista Burton is here. From our school board, we have Brenda Wolf, right here in the center of the room. Did I miss anybody? Well, Shebra's going to get her in. Thank you. Quick update on our recent work. We testified to our state delegation on Wednesday evening outlining WDC's priorities for the upcoming session. Criminal justice reform for a re-entry facility for women in Maryland for incarcerated women, of which there is none right now, freestanding. Protecting tenant rights through just cause eviction legislation. Educating medical practitioners to correct for implicit bias in treating their patients, specifically as relates to racial disparities in the rate of maternal death. Closing the long gun loophole, supporting our aging population where women increasingly outnumber men and face significant challenges. Regulating the disposal of hundreds of tons of toxic waste known as synthetic turf to keep our water and our children safe from contamination. Installing controls on the devastating impacts of medical debt. And of course, funding the Kirwan Commission's blueprint for Maryland's future. These are all serious topics and timely, and WDC's advocacy continues to be toward greater justice. Today we get to hear from three outstanding experts on the contents of the blueprint for Maryland, the reality of getting it through Annapolis, and the effects and implementation at our own county level. I'm going to hand it over to our County Board of Education President, Shebra Evans. Shebra is a former WDC board member. She holds a degree in economics and finance, which is probably pretty handy these days. Before joining the Board of Education, Shebra was a very active member of our County Council of PTAs, chairing multiple key committees. Our format today is for Shebra to make remarks and then introduce Dr. Brit Kirwan, chair of the Kirwan Commission, and Delegate Kaiser, who will be here shortly.
I'm here. Oh, I'm here. You're here. Yeah, great. We couldn't get through. I have a baby here too.
Oh, that's right. New baby. Delegate Kaiser is from District 14, and she is chair of the powerful House Ways and Means Committee. And following their remarks, I look forward to a lively question and answer, which Shebra will moderate while I circulate with a portable mic. I'd like to close with this quote before giving it to Shebra. Experience teaches us that much as Americans hate the status quo, they're sometimes not too excited about change. Second, policy is not everything. Political communication counts too. And third, success ultimately rests with uniting your allies and surging. So that is what I hope this conversation will help you get engaged to do. And with that, Shebra.
Thank you for that warm introduction. It feels so good to be back here. Definitely a different capacity. I'm used to helping plan the events for the Women's Democratic Club. So just really just want to be remiss if I didn't thank you all for your support and that you provided me over the years. And I am still a member, and just say thank you for having me back. My remarks are not long, but we do want to hear from myself as well as Mr. Kirwan and Delegate Kaiser, who has to leave a little bit early, but we want to make certain that we are able to ask questions. So I'm really excited to be here today to share the work, just to kind of give you a glimpse of what we are doing in Montgomery County Public Schools. The Board of Education, as well as the administration, we have a huge focus on equity that is all throughout every area of education. It's not just in the area of student performance, but it's in support and the resources. If you go onto our website, you will see that we have all means all. We have a framework around equity and achievement. And I just kind of wanted to outline a little bit of that for you before we go into hearing from the other speakers. All means all. Equity and achievement looks like in our area, in our Office of Shared Accountability under the leadership of Dr. Janet Wilson, we have implemented the equity accountability model. And with that, I'm just really pleased we're able to look at each individual student to see if we are providing the needs of those students, and if not, what that will look like for the students in terms of support. And we are really just able to dig into the detail. You know, in previous years, we were not required, nor did we look at the data by the intersection of poverty and race, and now we're doing that. So by us doing that, we are really able to know the actual students. We can get down to the percentages, to the numbers, and to the actual students that we need to think about how we can continue to provide them with that quality education that we set out to give to all of our students, regardless of their race or socioeconomic status. We recently, if you all are not aware, we hired an outside consultant to do a study. That study was around our allocation of resources. We wanted to know, based on the money that we were spending on our students in our schools, if we were spending enough and if we were actually getting the desired outcome that we were intending to get in our schools. And so I will say this, that the study didn't really bring back anything that we weren't aware of, but there were some items that it kind of brought a little bit, it raised the awareness around the number of novice teachers that we have in our school system and where we're concentrating those teachers. We typically find them in some of our higher poverty schools. And we're not saying, by no means are we saying that novice teachers are not up to speed. We're saying that we should not have a school building full of novice teachers. We were able to see that although we were spending a lot of money on our students that are typically in our higher needs schools, that it still wasn't making the mark in terms of what we needed to be providing to those students in the area of support. So with that consultant brought back to us those findings, you know, for once what we did not do is we did not say, come back with recommendations as to what we should do with a system, in our system. What we said is come back with findings, and we're gonna take that information and we're gonna share that with our broader community to come together to make these decisions for our students. And what I'm proud to say is our community took it and they ran with it. In particular, we have Byron Johns and Diego Guerrero here to, well, they're here, but what they did is they formed a Black and Brown coalition. And what they were able to do was bring that to the broader community to help us to reach communities that aren't particularly always paying attention to what's going on in our school system, and letting them know that here's what the findings were. We want you to work with us to hold the school system accountable. That's exactly what they have been doing with the Black and Brown Coalition. We had over 1,000 people attend a forum that was held on October the 15th. The NAACP has been partners as well. They recently held their annual kickoff, and there were over 900 people there. We also had our former U.S. Secretary John B. King come and speak to us about this work. Everybody's paying attention, and what we want to do, we want to make certain that when our students leave Montgomery County Public Schools, that they are are equipped, they are able to thrive well after high school. So I wanted to share that with you, very exciting information, but just wanted you all to know that so that as we come before our county council, I was in Annapolis a couple of weeks ago, I was before our state delegation this past week. You know, we're continuing to ask for funding. We need adequate funding to be able to support our students here in our school system in Montgomery County, and anything that you all can do to help support us in that advocacy, we would be very appreciative of that. So I will not talk too long. At some point, you'll be able to ask me additional questions, but I did want to highlight and talk a little bit and briefly introduce Mr. Kirwan. He is heading up a commission that we all have heard about, the Commission on Innovation of Excellence in Education, dubbed as the Kirwan Commission. We believe that he is a very critical leader here in our county and in our state to help us move the needle on making certain that we have a quality education system here in Montgomery County and across the nation. He has served as the chancellor at the University Systems of Maryland for about 13 years. He served as president at the Ohio State University. I'm a little impartial, I'm from Ohio, right? For 4 years, and he also served as president of the University of Maryland at College Park. And I just said all that to let you know that he has a huge commitment to education, that we don't have someone leading the charge on the current commission that is not dedicated to the work of education. And so I will not belabor the point. I will introduce Mr. Kirwan here to talk with you all.
Well, thank you very much, Ms. Evans, for that wonderful introduction and for the invitation to be here with all of you today. You know, I'm a lifelong Democrat, and not quite a lifelong Montgomery County resident for most of my life. My kids have grown up here, my grandkids have grown up here, and all have been through the Montgomery County schools. So it's wonderful to be in a room full of people that I really identify with. So again, I thank you for the invitation. I know that Senator Cardin is a staff member here. Yes, and I just want to publicly mention how supportive he has been of the commission's work, and he's written some op-eds that were just fabulous, and continues to ask what can he do to help, and I just want you to know how much I appreciate that, so please tell him once again on my behalf.
I'd be happy to, and greatly appreciates
Yes.
your work.
Thank you. So let me tell you a little bit about the commission, how it got started, what it found, what it's recommended, and where things stand today, and then I will pass the baton to my colleague, Delegate Kaiser, who served on the commission with me, fortunately, and was a very extremely valuable member of that effort. So the commission actually got started in 2016 at the end of the legislative session, and it was a bipartisan effort back then. It was created by Governor Hogan and the General Assembly, and this 25-member commission created. I was asked to chair it, and we were given an audacious charge. We were asked to make recommendations so that Maryland schools would perform at the level of the best performing schools in the world, and to develop cost estimates to implement those policies, and a funding formula, which we just completed yesterday, and I think is Ann and I are still on a high because of the last meeting of the commission. But the real work begins now, and Ann will be so critical to that effort. So when we came together, many of us had sort of read the press clippings. We thought Maryland's schools were in good shape. You know, maybe there was a problem here or there, but by and large, things were pretty good because somebody had rated us as the best school system in the country. another had put us in the top 5. So we thought, okay, this isn't going to be too hard a task. But then we started collecting data. Because if we're going to make recommendations so we'll be as good as the best, we had to know where are we now. And we found some very troubling things. In fact, although we have good schools in our state and good schools right here in Montgomery County and wonderful teachers, we don't have nearly enough of either. In fact, I would say after all of this work that our school system is broken and needs to be fixed. Let me tell you why I say that. Some of you probably know there's an exam called the NAEP exam, the National Assessment of Education Progress, mandated by the federal government, given to 4th and 8th graders in reading and math. And so you think if we're one of the best school systems in the United States, our scores would be at the top, wouldn't they? Yeah. Well, they're not. We rank like 28th, 29th, 32nd out of 50 states on these tests. And our scores have been going down, down, down. And the reading scores this year were below the national average. And then Miss Evans was talking about equity. We found out that, we all like to think of Maryland as a progressive state. Yeah. But we are not when it comes to school funding. We're regressive. We spend more on kids living in affluent communities than we do on schools serving high concentrations of poverty. And that's just not right. We don't get the resources to the kids that need it the most. And another very troubling thing we found is that really teaching for too many of our teachers is no longer a career. It's a revolving door. There was a report that came out from the State Department of Education in 2015 that said that, think about this, 47% of teachers leave the profession after 2 years. Now, how are you going to build a high-quality teaching staff with that kind of attrition? So the commission knew that it had some real work to do if we were going to fulfill our charge, and so we worked with a phenomenal, high-powered think tank in Washington, D.C., the National Center for Education and the Economy, that has spent the last 20 years studying the elements of high-performing school systems. What is it that makes a high performer? And based on their research, they developed what they call the building blocks of high-performing school systems. And the amazing thing is that the high performers, they exist in different parts of the world. They have different political structures. They have different economies, but they all adhere to these building blocks. So what we did as a commission, we took 2 years with an intensive gap analysis. Basically, we looked to see what does Maryland do with these building blocks and what do the high performers do. And out of that, we developed 5 major policy recommendations, and I'd be happy to go in more detail with these policy recommendations during the commission, but I'll give you a sense of them right now. The first one is we have to invest much more money in early childhood education and care. We do not have nearly enough young children coming to kindergarten ready to learn. So we're making recommended investments in early preschool, low-income 3 and 4-year-old children, but that's not enough. So much happens between 0 and 3. And so we also have recommended much greater investment in some of those services that work with young mothers and young children in that age group, like the Judy Centers and the Family Service Center. So that was our first policy recommendation. The second policy recommendation is we have to make teaching a high-status profession. There is not a high-performing school system in the world where teaching isn't thought of as a highly desirable profession, like being a lawyer or an accountant or an architect. We don't have that in this country. We have some dedicated souls who are willing to make sacrifices to be teachers, but we do not. You know, it's amazing, isn't it, when you think about, of all the professions, what profession is there out there that has more control over the future of our country? Teaching. And yet we don't invest enough resources. We don't prepare our teachers well enough. We don't give them enough support. So we have a whole new paradigm for teaching where we're going to up the game for our teacher preparation programs. We're recommending a higher certification standard for teachers. And we're recommending that teachers be put on a merit-based career ladder. And this career ladder will be benchmarked against other professions that require similar levels of education. So we expect to get many more highly qualified teachers into the classroom. That's how the high-performing systems work. And that's what we're going to do with these recommendations. The third recommendation is that we have to, if we're going to be as good as the best, we have to benchmark our curriculum against the curriculum at the high-performing schools. And so we want to change our college and career-ready standard. I'll tell you a shocking statistic that should keep all of us up at night. Every state has to have a college and career-ready standard. The federal government mandates that. Now, each state can decide what its standard is going to be, but you got to have one. So guess what? Maryland has chosen a particularly low standard. Our standard is that you can read at the 10th grade level and you can do Algebra 1. My granddaughters take Algebra 1 in middle school. But that's our college and career ready standard in Maryland. We know it's not college and career ready, but that's the standard. So this past June, lots of kids graduated from our high schools. Guess how many met that standard? Less than 40%. Now think about that. What is our workforce going to be like in a few decades if that's what's coming out of our high school? That's the kind of skills our kids have coming out of high school. And what chance do they have? Less than 40%. I wake up at night thinking about that. That's a frightening statistic. So we're saying, no, we got to raise the college and career ready standard. Our college and career ready standard is that you will be able to take a college level course without remediation. That's logical to me. We're going to set the target so most kids get there by the 10th grade. And then in the 11th and 12th grade, they got pathways. They can do advanced placement course. They can do international baccalaureate. Or they could do early college. Maybe even earn a 2-year degree while they're in, when they finish high school. Or at least be well on their way to one. And then there'll be a third pathway. Now, these kids are college and career ready, so they have options, but the third pathway is a rigorous career and technical education certificate. We're going to bring in the trades and the private sector to set a standard, so when kids finish high school, they have an industry recognized certification and go into a job paying $40,000 and $50,000 a year right out of high school. I know that. You like that? That's the third recommendation. The fourth is a significant new funding strategy for schools serving high concentrations of poverty. We have to address this funding equity issue, and so that's the fourth recommendation. The fifth is that we got to have a strong system of accountability. We cannot ask the citizens of the state to make an investment that we're calling for unless there's a sense we know we're going to get a return on investment. So we've created a very elaborate and significant, rigorous accountability structure, which at its pinnacle will be an oversight board of a half a dozen or so highly respected citizens who will give and they will have to certify that policies have been appropriately implemented and results are being achieved in order for full funding to flow. And if those haven't happened, then there's going to be support teams to go into these schools and get them on track. So it's very important that we have a credible accountability structure, and we have that. So we have these policy recommendations. We costed them out. It's a 10-year implementation plan, and the cost would rise at the 10th year between the state and the locals by $3.8 billion across the state. That's a little over 2.5% increase a year for 10 years. And we were asked to develop a formula to divide up these costs between the state and locals. We've just completed that work yesterday. And so our work is done now, and we're about to wrap this up and hand it to Delegate Kaiser and her colleagues. And they're going to just, get it through the General Assembly with some effort, believe me. Let me just close with a few personal thoughts. First, I'm a mathematician. And one of the characteristics of a mathematician is you got to be proved, something's got to be proven to you. There's a hypothesis, and then you got to have facts that lead to a logical conclusion. And I'm here to tell you as a mathematician, if the state has the will to implement this report, we will have one of the best school systems in the world. Why do I know that? Because we'll be doing what the best school systems in the world do. Now there's some people that say, we can't afford it. I ask you, we can't afford not to do it. Do we want fewer than 40% of our kids coming out of high school not able to read at the 10th grade level and do Algebra 1? But there's something else. This will eventually pay for itself. Let me tell you why. We do this, and guess what? We have higher levels of education in our state. People earn more money. Our economies are stronger. Our state has more resources. And let me tell you something else. Who's in prison now? Lots of young people that didn't get a good education. So our incarceration costs will go down. And guess who's on the Medicaid rolls? Young, uneducated people largely who haven't had a chance at a good education. So our Medicaid expenditures go down. So there's an analysis that's going to come out very soon that shows this will pay for itself. So my grandkids say to me, well, Pop, it's a no-brainer. And I think that's how I feel about it. But make no mistake, folks, there are powerful forces out there that don't want this to happen. So, Governor Hogan boasts proudly, he's invested more in education than any governor in the history of the universe. So that sounds like to me he's owning what we have in education now, right? So I want to ask Mr. Governor Hogan, are you happy with what you're getting for your investment? Are you happy that fewer than 40% of your graduates from our high schools are college and career ready? Are you happy that we have gross funding inequities around the state? Does that make you feel good? Are you happy that teaching is a revolving door? He's owned this. He's owned it because he's bragging about his investment. So I think we are this is a critical moment for our state. We have a huge choice to make over the next 6 months. We can decide that Governor Hogan's right. We want the status quo. We're not going to do anything. We're going to just keep on keeping on like we are. And maybe hope that we'll get a little bit better and something will change. Actually, Einstein calls that the definition of insanity. To keep doing what you've always done and expect a different result. Or we can be bold. We can invest in our state, build a world-class workforce, and give every child in every zip code in the state of Maryland to have a chance at the American dream. Now, we can win this battle, and it is going to be a battle, but we can win it. But only if we rally together, we come together, we all speak out and speak up. And that's exactly what I am going to do everywhere I can for the next 6 months. And I ask each and every one of you to do it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Kirwan. I'm stepping in quickly to thank our county executive for joining us, Mark Elrich. And we're also joined by Eden Durbin representing Delegate Solomon.
So the next voice you will hear from is our very own Montgomery County Delegate Ann Kaiser. She is also a product of Montgomery County Public Schools. Very proud of that. She has been a delegate since 2002. She attended undergrad at the University of Chicago. She received her BA in political science. She received her 2 masters from the University of Michigan. Formerly was a majority leader and now serves as the chair of Ways and Means, and she's the mother to beautiful AJ. So at this time, we would ask Delegate Ann Kaiser to come to the podium.
Thank you all. Thank you all very much. Thank you for inviting me. Thanks to Leslie for inviting me. Thanks for Diana for everything that you're doing for this event. And thanks really to all of you here for your advocacy and everything you've done over the years on so many issues helping Montgomery County. Thank you to Shebra. Always good to see you, and also Brenda Wolf from the school board as well. I have to tell you a little bit about Brit Kirwan sitting here. As you can tell, he is the cheerleader for this commission. But he's not just a cheerleader, he's the thought leader as well. And the passion you saw from him today is the passion that he's had for years on this commission and sharing this around the state with every group that will listen. And you know, he's been the chancellor of our university system of Maryland, and when he tells you that this commission is his #1 life work, you can see it. You can feel it, you can believe it. I'm sorry that there's Ohio State in your history. As a Michigan student. So, and I do apologize that we have to leave early today. I'm sure everyone will understand that my baby's grandparents want to see her, and we have to go north on 95. So that's why we're racing home, grabbing the dog, and going up to the grandparents. So thank you to Shirley Brandman and Aruna Miller for helping out with the baby right now. And she's just 6 months old. So my wife reminds me that I should often say AJ is why we're doing this. But for everyone with children and grandchildren, and yes, I am a product of the Montgomery County Public Schools. So just so important. So. My God, again, Dr. Kirwan, following him, who would want to do that? Yeah. So what I'm going to talk about is a little bit different. I'm going to say, I am going to give a little, maybe some of the background will be a little bit the same, but I'm going to talk about how I think it'll fare in the legislature, some of the realities of the budget, the governor in Annapolis, and I'll take my gloves off a little bit more for the governor, just a little bit more. Talk about options for funding it, and then just some suggested actions for all of you around the room. Now, Brit already gave some of the background, and just to highlight, we had 3 years of full-day meetings. It was a very long process, but we did come together on 5 consensus areas. And as he said, early interventions, high-quality and diverse teachers, career and college readiness, more resources for students in need, and strong accountability. And what was great was this deep dive we took into looking at Massachusetts and New Jersey, at looking at Singapore, and looking at other places around the world with the great systems. We weren't just doing what was done in 2002, saying what is adequate, understanding that adequate was not seen as a neutral term, but a positive term. But in this case, what does it really mean to be career comes first, career and college ready. And I think that's so important. And I'll take a little bit of a tangent on the career issue. The thing I've often said is that for those of you who had kids in the Montgomery County Public Schools or really anywhere else, if someone had said to you that your son or daughter would be a fantastic electrician, what most parents hear is, your kid's not smart. But what you're actually being told is, your kid would make an excellent electrician, not have to get 4 years of college loans that they may have some struggles to pay for, and have a great career, make a lot of money, possibly run their own business and everything more. And so there really does need to be a culture change, I think, around that career and technology education. So I hope everyone, when you hear that someone younger in your life would make a great electrician, a great carpenter, a great technician of whatever sort, that's a compliment. It is not a bad thing. Cameramen as well. Yes, I saw you applauding there. So yes, I mean, so many good trades. We spent the 2018 session, we put about $30 million into what we thought were some of the important consensus areas, and then this past year in 2019, about $250 million, with just more investments in pre-K, teacher salaries, and a few other areas. So just trying to put our money where our mouth is. So what's the success look like in the legislature? So let me break that part down. For right now, House Bill 1 in this next legislative session will be school construction, but House Bill 2 is the recommendations from the Kirwan Commission. And so that comes from our speaker, that comes from the Senate President. Those two pieces of education are the top two priorities of the General Assembly. So if that gives you any idea, we have a strong Democratic majority in the House of Delegates, not quite as strong in the state Senate. The passion for this issue is there. Everyone believes in it. We're going to pass a really great bill. And then the other things that happen is that the current and former members of our commission, I'm not sure if Dr. Kirwan could have predicted this when it first happened. When I was put on the commission, I was chairing the education subcommittee, and since then became the chair of the full committee for Ways and Means. I used to sit next to Delegate Adrienne Jones on the commission. She is now the Speaker of the House. I think Senator Pinsky wasn't chair of his full committee yet when he was put on the commission, and since then, in those 3 years, he became the full committee chair. Other changes like that, and then when Rich Madalino unfortunately left the state Senate, but is working for our county executive, Mark Elridge, Rich was replaced on our commission by Senator Bill Ferguson, the new Senate President. So those who've been on the those who are on the commission, those who've been on the commission, are real leaders in the House and Senate, and that is very fortunate. But if we really want to say that education's our #1 issue, and everyone running for office, these and ours, everyone running always says education's #1, and then we have to prove it. We really have to show that this is our value, and that the investments that we need to make in our future. So there will be still some fight, but I can't promise anything. There is press here, but I believe we will pass a very strong bill, and that it will be, as Dr. Kirwan suggests, groundbreaking and really making our schools a world-class system. So what are the realities of the budget, the governor, and Annapolis? So the budget isn't numbers. I think everyone thinks about the budget as being numbers. The budget is a reflection of our values. It's a reflection of our priorities. And so I believe that is why education's our #1 funding element in the state budget, and it should be even more so. So what's happening? In these next few years, I think Dr. Kirwan described that over the next few years, the investments aren't as high, and that we still get to that $3.8 billion by year 10, but we slowed down the first few years, and that's a good thing. And let me see if I can say why. First of all, we have a few funding sources already. I don't have to dive into the details about the blueprint fund we created, the corporate filing fees, something called marketplace facilitators I'm glad to follow up with. But we really don't need new funding sources until FY22, and even then, some small amounts at the beginning. And I think that's a good thing. Why? Two things. My background is early childhood education. I did my master's thesis on Head Start. Quality early childhood education is the most important thing we can do. But we just can't suddenly say, let's provide it for all 3-year-olds in need across the state, and for all 3-year-olds and all 3-year-olds in poverty and all 4-year-olds across the state. We can't just suddenly do that. We don't have the teachers, and we don't have the facilities. There's a reason we have to build these things up, and we have to build up other parts of the commission recommendations as well. But I think there's another thing that we have to do. We are asking everyone across the state to pay more. And I think we have to prove to people that it's working. And I'd like to think in these first few years that these added investments that we put in, we will be able to show people within 2, 3, or 4 years that the payoff is working, and that everyone has to dig even deeper. So I think the funding work group did a great job with that, and I'm just really excited about about what we're doing. Then I was asked to talk about the governor as well. So I think we're going to, we're going to pass this legislation, I would say, despite the governor. One of the things this governor says is that we can't afford it. Not only can we, as has already been stated, not only can we not afford to do it, we already have a plan on how to fund these first few years. So we can. The governor is out there telling people the multitude of taxes that would have to be raised. I think he's double, triple, quadruple counting. He's just saying all the different possibilities to get us there, and he's adding them all up together. So it's just not true what he's selling people on the taxes. One of my favorite parts is when he says there's no accountability. This past year, 2019, the governor had a bill on accountability. We took his language, we put it in the Kirwan bill. So I suggest the governor read Senate Bill 1030 from this past year and see the accountability that we put in to this legislation. The other thing I sometimes hear from critics of this is that money doesn't help education. It's ironic to me in two ways. One, has already been described, this governor likes to take credit for funding education more than anyone else, but at the same time is trying to tell people that money doesn't matter. Now the other thing I want people to understand, this governor funding more than every governor before him, every governor could have said that before that. It is the formulas that the legislature put in place. It is increasing enrollment, it is increasing costs. In fact, there have been things that we've done for education broadly across the state and specifically for Baltimore City that Governor Hogan said no and stripped that funding away. So let's not give him credit for that. And I'm sure people have heard what the governor is doing, trying to raise $2 million, what's called dark money. I think it's a crime that dark money can be raised in any part of politics that no one has to say. When someone gives me a check, thank you Karen Brito for $100 checks over the years, but when someone gives me a check, you know the name, you can see it on the list. There's accountability, there's transparency. And yet he's trying to raise $2 million to fight this Kirwan plan. The legacy of this governor is that he's trying to kill the best educational opportunity that we have for my daughter and for the next generation, and I think that's a shame. So I don't really have a good segue into the next point that I wanted to mention, but the part about funding options, the first thing we have to think about is let's stop talking about maybe funding, taxes, and those are the real words, but this is about investments in education. And when we look at the different taxes that we might be raising, we have to look at some of the other states and we have to compare to what they're doing in different tax areas, so that's something that we will be doing. So another thing I want to mention is some of the taxes that people are suggesting, and then I'll get to a little bit what I'm thinking on these. So there's lists out there, there's different tax loopholes to close. Of course, one person's tax loophole is one person's business incentive, so we'll figure that out. Eliminating ineffective tax credits. We've provided tax credits to spur on businesses of a lot of types. Is it working? You know, we in Montgomery County benefit from some of those investments into the biotech corridor, research and development and so forth. But are these tax credits working, and would they be better spent somewhere else? They're looking at tax on services. We are no longer the economy that, no state is the economy that we were in 1950 when the current structure generally of sales, property, and income taxes were developed, and yet we don't tax services and we're now a service economy. So I think that's something coming over the next years. There's conversation, and this is the worst part of the state to mention it in, the millionaire's tax. People have been talking about that as well. There's different disagreements on whether marijuana legalization and taxation. There have been talk about other sin taxes like increasing taxes on cigarettes and sports betting. So that's what other people are suggesting. What do I think? So I chair the Ways and Means Committee, going into my 4th session doing so. One of the things I think we need to do is build on something that Delegate Dumais from District 15 from the western part of this county tried doing many years ago, was creating a long-term commission on taxes. Like, what is the right answer? What are the right tax mixes that reflect the economy that we have today and that keep people here in the state and don't scare businesses but help spur them on or incentivize? So what are the things we should be doing? I also do agree, and I know not everyone will agree with me, I do believe that marijuana should be legalized, regulated, and taxed. I would tell people when it comes to sports betting, I do expect us to pass this upcoming legislative session. That'll bring in about $20 million a year. That is not a panacea of any sorts for funding anything in particular, but it is something that I expect that we'll be doing. So when it comes to, I was asked also to look at like suggested actions and what can all of you do. Now the challenge that you have here in Montgomery County is that you can talk to your 32 legislators, 8 in the Senate and 24 in the House of Delegates, until the sky's blue every day. Boy, I wish it were right now. You know what? We are 32 good votes already. And so there's that sense of, then what? You want to talk to people in other jurisdictions, and they really want to hear from the people that they represent, and not necessarily people here in Montgomery County. So then, still, what can you do? So I think there's several things. A first point I want to make, and I make this to my colleagues as well, a lot of people argue about being progressives, and that's a good thing to be, but at the same time, there's also, it fights against this idea to be good to Montgomery County. So there's the parochial side. If it's purely progressive, we will be, as we always are, we will be paying more in Montgomery County and not getting as much. And there's things in the formula that help us in Montgomery County. We have a strong number of special populations when it comes to free and reduced, students getting free and reduced price meals. We have a larger proportion than most people have of students needing special ed services. And I think we have the number one amount of students English as a second language. And so there's formulas that help those populations, and there have been things done in the formulas back in 2002 with the old Thornton legislation and today that will help Montgomery County. And for all those things that are good for Montgomery County, one could argue that those are things we're not doing, helping maybe poor people in poorer jurisdictions. And I mentioned that just as a caveat and really as a caution. I think there's a way that we can be both progressive and a little bit parochial and still know that we do have pockets of poverty in this county, and we do have challenges here, and we do have to fight for the needs of this county. So I just want to say there's kind of like a push and pull between being perfectly progressive and being good for Montgomery County, as the 32 of us were elected to represent Montgomery County and Montgomery County's needs. In terms of the focus and lobbying and advocacy, I think sometimes letters to the editor are good. It gets out the message to people beyond those people in this room and other rooms that are already on board and already committed to this. I think and for those of you who are involved, getting engaged with PTA groups, for anyone who can talk to people in other jurisdictions and get them excited in talking about it and talking to their legislators, that's so important. And just every group that you can involve and every group that you can educate. And I really think, I want to come back to that point of our governor, investing money to kill, with the hope of killing this legislative effort, is that you tell each and every person you know about that.
Yes.
That should be the legacy of this governor, claiming both to fund education more than anyone else and trying to spend $2 million to kill this effort. Shame on him. And I wish I didn't end on that point. So, yesterday at the commission meeting, at the end when we voted 25-3 in favor of the recommendations, the room gave a standing ovation to Dr. Kirwan, and I'd invite you all to join me now to do the same.
Delegate Kaiser for your remarks. Before we open it up, I just kind of wanted to just briefly share a little bit about Montgomery County Public Schools for those of you who may be in the room that may not be, let me take this off, that may not be up to date or up to speed on our numbers. So in the state of Maryland, we are the largest school district. In the nation, we are the 14th largest school district. Since 2010, we have increased enrollment by over 20,000 students. As of November the 15th, our enrollment is 166,000 students. We've expanded to 208 schools. We are growing, right? So I wanted to also state that we are behind the Kirwan Commission. We received, as a result of Senate Bill 1030, we received $24 million. That money went to investments in early education. We opened up 2 early childhood development centers, one in the Down County Consortium in the Silver Spring area, McDonald Knowles Early Childhood Center. We opened up one just a couple weeks ago in Up County in the Gaithersburg area. And that serves 80 students, and the one at Silver Spring serves 90 students. We have been able to increase teacher salaries as well as educational employee salaries from that $24 million. We've been able to divert funds to special education. We've been able to give money to 8 of our of our schools with highest concentration of poverty. We've been able to provide training to teachers around reading. I just wanted to share with you what we've done with the $24 million, and to say that we support it. We could always use more, but I also wanted to share with you some of the recommendations that we have to the commission, in particular around professionalizing and incentivizing our teachers. We believe our teachers should be incentivized by all means, but we also believe that all of our educational employees should be incentivized. So we're recommending that they include all of our educational employees. We could not do this work without our bus drivers, without our paraeducators, without our administrators. I just wanted to state that. So as you go to Annapolis, as you advocate, and hopefully you are advocating on our behalf as well, that you have that included. And then also in the area of poverty, how the Maryland State Department of Education defines poverty is a little bit different. How we define poverty in Montgomery County. The federal guidelines for poverty is if you're at or below 130%, then you receive free and reduced price meals. So that's for our students. So a family of 4, that's $24,750, right? And so what happens is MSDE is looking at economically disadvantaged as those receiving supplemental nutritional assistance, a SNAP, from the SNAP program, and also families that one that says the temporary assistance of needy families. So they are looking at families that are economically disadvantaged that are receiving direct supports from SNAP and from TANFs, and also if you're homeless, if you're living in foster care, and if you're in Head Start. So from Montgomery County, that would only include about 16% of our students that are living in poverty, based on how we define poverty, which is our students on free and reduced price meals. That's 34% of our student population. So we are missing the mark. So we're just recommending that they look at how they're defining economically disadvantaged, because it will put a definite strain on Montgomery County. So I just wanted to share that with you from Montgomery County Public Schools perspective. And as I open up for questions, microphone, as I open it up for questions, I'm gonna give the first question to Dr. Kirwan. I was gonna make the first question Delegate Kaiser, but she did such a great job in coming up here and spelling it all out. I was gonna ask her, what would you advise us as advocates to do in Annapolis, and then what would you see as the challenge? But you laid it all out very nicely. So I wanted to turn it over to Dr. Kirwan to answer the question. A large component of the recommendations of the teacher career lattice. Can you talk about what other countries do to support teachers? And also recommendations, they value the National Board Certification, master's degree. As a former chancellor and a longtime member of higher education, what are your thoughts about this?
Following Dr. Kirwan's response, I will be circulating with questions, so get your questions ready.
Yes. Well, as I mentioned, improving the circumstances for our teachers, providing them better support, giving them incentives to stay in the profession is a really central part of the Commission's recommendation. So what we have put in place is we call it a career ladder. There would be 5 steps in the career ladder. And in order to advance up the career ladder, we wouldn't use test scores, because that's, what happens then is everybody teaches to the test and the kids aren't learning what they need to learn. In our career ladder, we would have, the top grade would be, say, a master teacher. And we would expect the master teachers to evaluate younger teachers on the career ladder and make a recommendation to the principal. And then it would be in the hands of the principal to make the determination. So it would be a very rigorous process. It's, in a way, sort of how promotion and tenure works in higher education. Faculty make recommendations, faculty get evaluated, the recommendations go up the ladder to the president approves promotion and tenure or not, and it works very well in higher education. So it's sort of taking a little bit of a picture from higher ed. This is sort of how it works in, it's an amalgamation of how it works in the high-performing school systems around the world. Teachers get onto a career or step system, they get evaluated, and incidentally, we learned that in the high-performing school systems, they don't test the way we do here in the U.S. They do testing, maybe like in the 4th grade, and the 8th grade, and the 12th grade, just to see that how, is everybody on track. But this incessant testing we do is, I believe, quite counterproductive. Now, in this instance, it's an artifact of the federal government, not our state. I mean, a lot of this is out of control of the state that is mandated by the federal government through the No Child Left Behind. But the commission has recommended that the state do what it can to influence a change at the Department of Education, U.S. Department of Education, to not get rid of testing, but not put so much reliance on it. There was a second part of the question, the career ladder, the teacher, the...
Yeah, just what your thoughts were on that.
Yeah, but then there was a...
Let me see, sorry. Yeah, so the recommendation is, it values the national
Right.
board certification.
Oh, the national board, yes, that's it. So, there is a standard called the National Board certification for teachers. It's kind of like what happens if you want to be a board-certified doctor or a board-certified architect. So it's a process through which teachers go, and they have to meet certain benchmarks. They get evaluated, and there's a national standard in order to receive this designation as a national board-certified teacher. And we looked at a lot of data from around the country, and it turns out that there is a very good correlation between national board certification and student learning outcomes. So what we have put into our recommendation is, after we get our teacher prep programs up to snuff, we raise our certification standards, we build our career ladder, that we will expect all of our teachers on the career ladder to get national board certification. And there's only one other state that has done this to date, and that's the state of Washington. And they have very good results from that. So the commission became big believers in the power of the national board certification, and it is it does parallel what happens in other professions. It is one more step towards making teaching a high status, highly respected profession.
Thank you, Dr. Kirwan. It may be self-evident, but there is a piece of paper on every table that was distributed by Lisa Fuller of Strong Schools Maryland and NOCO Women. And if you would like to get involved in this effort, please add your information to that, and we will collect them at the end. There should be one on every table, and please share your pens. So, first question. Yes. If you would identify yourself, please.
Diego Uriburu with Identity and the Black and Brown Coalition. We heard this morning at a meeting that the National Board certification was biased in the sense that only 8% of black teachers and only 4% of Latino teachers actually in Maryland get that certification. So the question is, will the recommendations include supports for minority teachers?
Excellent point. Absolutely, and that data is looking back in time, and what we're talking about is looking to the future. One of our recommendations is, in particular, that we've got to do a much better job of diversifying our teaching force. we're going to have scholarships to encourage more young people to go into teaching. And we're looking to our historically black colleges and universities to put more emphasis on teacher preparation so they can be a catalyst for increasing the diversity of the teaching force. But then the recommendations include support for teachers to assist them in becoming board certified. We expect that every new teacher will have a master teacher as a mentor to help them get through the first couple of years of as their induction into the teaching profession, and then the supports will be provided to help them get board certification. But thank you for that question.
Thank you.
Yes.
Can you speak a little bit about?
Hang on.
Oh, I'm sorry.
No, we got it. Please. No.
All right. Hi, I'm Julie Riley. I'm the chair of the MCC PTA Special Education Committee and a new commissioner on the Commission for Children and Youth. I would just, if you could share with a bit about how recommendations and how they would support students with special needs, learning differences, and also I know that in some countries, all students have a kind of a learning plan. I don't, for lack of a better, student learning plan, and would that be a part of the I mean, even non-special education students, and would that be part of the recommendations too?
That's sort of part and parcel of this, the recommendations we have for the pathways once kids get college and career ready at the 10th grade. So there'd be a learning plan to do advanced placement, international baccalaureate, or early college, or a pathway through a career technical education. But we spent inordinate amount of time working on the issue of ensuring that kids with special needs get adequate resources. There is, and so we invested in particular on special ed. In the bill that was passed in this last session, we invested a significant amount of money to increase funding for special education. But there is a separate committee working at this very moment that's about to produce a report that has been studying the issue of what should the proper weight be for special education, and that will be undoubtedly incorporated in the legislation when it comes through the General Assembly. In terms of schools serving concentrations of poverty, high concentrations of poverty, where we are underinvesting presently as a state, we've done a number, I think, of very important things. First of all, any school that has 55% or more low-income kids would be what's called a community school. And a community school is a very special school. It has additional staff for counseling, for other social services. It has a staff member that's connected to resources in the community that can be brought in to the school to help the kids and their parents. It's a school that has extra resources for tutoring. The community school has after-school academic programming, summer academic programming. But then another creative thing we did that, to the best of our knowledge, no other state in the union has done is, based on our research, we came to understand that the degree of concentrated poverty in a school matters significantly. That is to say, there's a difference between a school with, say, 60% low-income students and 90% low-income students. So our formula now, built into our formula, this is brand new, will add resources to a school of and beyond the compensatory weight that all low-income kids get, but will add additional funding to a school as the concentration of poverty in that school rises. And we are going to move from being basically a regressive state with these funding formulas to a progressive state.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Donna Barron. I was wondering during the evaluation of what was working well and what was not working well, how involved were the current teachers involved in that process, since they're in the trenches every day?
Right. Well, and we need to support them for sure. We quite involved. First of all of our meetings were open, and we heard from many presentations from a whole variety of groups, including teachers. But then when we really rolled up our sleeves and got into the 5 policy areas, sort of developing these 5 policy areas that I mentioned, we split up the commission into work groups. And the work groups actually had people not on the commission on the work group as well. But in addition to that, we welcomed every group to come and speak to the work groups so they could fully understand the circumstances of what particular issue was being addressed by the work group, and specifically in the case of our recommendations on the teaching profession. So we had MSEA, we had the Baltimore Teachers Union, representatives from them come. We had a teacher on the commission, and so we spent endless hours listening to very valuable input, including most especially from working teachers.
Peggy Dennis, I love everything I've heard about your objectives, and I'd like to focus on the 4th one, more resources to ensure success for all students. You have a very valuable resource that I think is very much underutilized in the time of many people like ourselves who are retired senior citizens who would love to get into programs to mentor and tutor students, particularly at-risk students. I joined such a program, and I cannot tell you how frustrated and angry I was because it was poorly conceived. It was 1 hour a week of nothing more than glorified after-school daycare. We badly need for every PTA, community organization, and religious group that would like to set up a tutoring or mentoring program to have very specific guidelines on how to train the tutors, how the tutors need to interface with the students and the parents of the students that they're trying to help. Does your more resources focus on that at all?
Right. We did not. I think what you suggest makes all the sense in the world to me, and I would hope that superintendents and principals would draw on that resource. We did not make such a specific recommendation about volunteerism in the schools, but there will definitely be more resources in the school. And it would seem to me that superintendents and principals should hear what you have to say and take advantage of the goodwill that definitely exists throughout our communities. Yes? Oh.
Here we go. From a man.
Yes, all right.
I'm Scott Weber. I am a member of one of the Blueprint Coalitions, also Citizens for a Blueprint Future. I'm also a proud WDC member. In a conversation with Al Thornton last year, he'd actually talked about the fact that there were formulas that were actually well conceived, put in place. However, the implementation of it was actually the biggest issue. Can you speak to the plans to make sure, in addition to just accountability, how it is you plan to actually make sure that the formulas and the concepts are actually implemented, not just talked about for press?
Right. Actually,
Take one more question over here.
Al Thornton and I are very good friends. We've known each other for 20 or 30 years. And I think that he and his commission did some pioneering work. The formulas that they actually developed, we built off those, made improvements in them, but they really were the basis of our final funding formula. I asked him, there's been a lot of commentary that we didn't get the full impact of the recommendations. I just mentioned that our NAEP scores are going down, so what about the Thornton funding and the Thornton formula? Well, first of all, the state did not keep up its commitment to the Thornton funding. So let's say that for one thing. So our schools are not funded across the board at the level that was projected with the Thornton plan. But the Thornton plan was all about funding. It was not about policy recommendations. So here's basically how Thornton worked. There was going to be an infusion of money into pre-K through 12 education, and each jurisdiction was to say, what's our plan for using the money? There was no overarching policy context. There was no invest in early childhood education, make teaching a high status profession, build these pathways through the 10th and 11th grade, etc. There was no policy construct. It was left to each jurisdiction to say how they want to use the funds. So then they submitted a plan. The plan went to the State Board of Education. It got stamped approved. Money flowed, and nobody ever went back to see to the extent to which these plans were actually implemented, or if they made a difference. So there is a fundamental change between what the Thornton process produced and what the commission that I had the privilege of chairing has done, because there's a lot of freedom for jurisdictions to say how they're going to implement these policies. Nobody's telling, there's no rigid cookie cutter. They've got a lot of autonomy to design their responses as they see fit best, but they have to follow, they have to invest in these 5 policy areas, and there will be accountability. So there is a fundamental difference.
My name is Arlene Rosenbush. I'm a new member here, and I'm a retired teacher. I applaud early childhood and all the recommendations you have. I just didn't want you to forget about gifted education on the other end of the spectrum, especially in elementary school. Those kids tend to get overlooked, and a lot of kids need to be identified who are lower socioeconomic, who also could be gifted. And also that kind of ties in with the STEM. If you don't get the kids in elementary school interested in math and science, you're not going to get them on later on, and we really need more influx of a more diverse culture going into those fields and women. And when you get them in the elementary school, you can get them for life. And it would be great to have a STEM lab in every elementary school. University of Virginia has an excellent one in Falls Church. If you need a sample of one, they'd be glad to show you around. And that's something I really think kind of falls by the wayside because people are so concerned about getting everyone caught up. Don't forget about the other end of the spectrum.
Okay, thank you for that. We've talked a lot about teaching. There's an important initiative in our recommendations, and those of you who are teachers or retired teachers might resonate with these recommendations. One of the things we learned about the high-performing school systems is that there are enough teachers in the school so they have time to work together as teams, collaborate on developing new curricula, addressing pedagogical issues. Where in the U.S. and in Maryland in particular, we tend to take teachers, put them in the classroom, and they stay there all day. They don't interact with other teachers. Now, you know, my son's an architect, and if his firm gets a big project, they don't take an architect, lock him in a room, and him or her in the room, and say, you know, produce a plan in 6 months. They come together. They all study the problems. They contribute to the solutions. That's the environment of a profession, and that's what we want teaching to be. So we currently, teachers in our schools spend 80% of their day in the classroom on average. What we've recommended is we're going to add additional teachers to the school so they will spend 60% of their time and give them much more time to work together as teams. And it will also provide more teachers for special attention to special needs kids, including our gifted and talented kids. So one of our big recommendations is Add more teachers, high-quality teachers, so this can be a true profession.
Thank you, Dr. Kirwan. Can we have a round of applause for our speaker? I urge you all to stay and network together and sign up on those sheets that are on the table. I want to close with a quote from Anne Frank. How wonderful it is that nobody need wait a single moment before starting to improve the world. So let's get out there and improve the world. Thank you. I apologize. There's one more announcement regarding a forum that WDC is sponsoring January 11th at the Rockville Library. That's January 11th, Saturday, Rockville Library, 2 to 4 o'clock, and it is on the environment. We will have 3 outstanding speakers. Joyce Tootin is a teacher at Clarksburg High School and a NOAA climate steward educator. Mike Tidwell is the chair of the Chesapeake Climate Action Network, and Dr. Ed Maybach is a professor of climate at George Mason University who lives here in Montgomery County. That's January 11th, Saturday, 2 to 4 at the Rockville Library. Please join us for that too. Thank you.
No, it's more basic, not, well, Mike Tidwell.